Namaskar, a warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is Abhineet Shukla and with me is Prashant Kumar Sinha, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. Prime Minister Narendra Modi lauds the role of Corona warriors in fight against COVID-19. Government of India says nearly 12 crore doses of vaccine will be available in June this year for national COVID vaccination program. Thousands take to streets in Brazil protesting against President Bolsonaro's COVID management in the country. China's cargo spacecraft docks with the space station module Tiane. Chelsea crowned champions of Europe with a win over Manchester City at the UEFA Champions League final. And in boxing, India's Pooja Rani Batra wins gold at Asian Boxing Championship. As the number of COVID cases is on the rise, we appeal to our listeners not to lower the guard, follow all the precautions, and all those above 45 years of age who have taken the first dose of COVID-19 vaccine to get vaccinated with the second dose at the scheduled time. Stay safe and protected by following these 3 simple steps. Wear a face mask, maintain 2 gaz ki duri for social distancing, and focus on hand and face hygiene. And now the news in detail. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has expressed gratitude to Corona warriors who played a major role in the fight against the second wave of COVID. He said, delivering medical oxygen to remote parts of the country was indeed a huge task. Addressing the nation in his Mann Ki Baat program in All India Radio, the Prime Minister said, people have witnessed how India's doctors, nurses and frontline warriors have toiled day and night without bothering about themselves to tackle the second wave. He said the nation's resolve has always been stronger than any challenge it may face. Mr. Modi said, in the midst of the pandemic, India is moving forward with the resolve of service and cooperation. He urged everyone to follow social distancing and wear masks and get themselves vaccinated. For the 17th consecutive day today, the COVID recoveries outnumbered the new cases. In the past 24 hours, over 2,76,000 COVID patients recovered, whereas in the same time span, 1,65,553 fresh cases were recorded nationwide. With this, the recovery rate in the country has further improved to 91.25%. The daily reported cases continue to dip and it remained the lowest in the last 46 days. The cumulative share of active COVID cases in the country continues to witness decline and comprises 7.58% of the total reported cases. The test positivity rate also remained at around 8% and below the 10% mark for the 6th consecutive day. The Health Ministry has informed that currently there are over 21 lakh active cases in the country. It also informed that 3,460 COVID-related deaths were reported in the last 24 hours, taking the cumulative death toll to 3,25,972.
The government has debunked myths and misinformation on performance of the COVID platform. Dr. R.S. Sharma, chairman of the Empowered Group on Technology and Data Management to Combat COVID-19, said the COVID platform has been designed in such a way that it will not fall victim to cyber attacks. Talking to AIR News, Dr. Sharma stressed on the importance of digitizing the vaccination process. Mr. Sharma also elaborated on the arrangements being made to make COVID accessible to the rural population.
We have the facility of a walk-in jabs also, which means that without registration, you can go to a vaccination center. And if there are vacancies, you can get a jab. 2, the system allows as many as 4 people on the same mobile phone. Basically, if you have a mobile phone, one in a family, then all 4 members of the family can be registered against the same mobile number. 3rd, all the common service centers of the country, which are 250,000 in number, and we have about 600,000 villages. Almost between any 3 villages, there is one common service center. Now, those common service centers have also been empowered to provide assisted registration facilities and booking facilities for the population. 4, we have recently opened the call center. 1075 is a toll-free number on which you can actually do a booking and registration using that call center.
The Union government has said that the inflow of foreign aid to combat COVID-19 is being promptly dispatched to the states and union territories. The Union Health Ministry said the centre has been receiving international cooperation of COVID-19 relief medical supplies and equipment since the 27th of last month from different countries and organizations. The ministry said the major consignments received in the past 2 days are from South Korea, Indian and Bahrainian organizations, the Indian community in Shanghai, and Indian business and professional groups in the UAE. A dedicated coordination cell has been created in the Union Health Ministry to coordinate the receipt and allocation of foreign COVID relief material.
Now let's take a look at the coronavirus updates from around the world. Thousands of Brazilians have taken to the streets to protest President Jair Bolsonaro's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic in the country. According to reports, protesters were seen in at least 16 cities demanding Bolsonaro's impeachment. Bolsonaro has been heavily criticized for downplaying the severity of COVID-19. He has dismissed the notion of wearing a mask, encouraged mass gatherings, and cast doubt over the importance of vaccines. Meanwhile, the United States is on track to reach its goal of having 70% of its adult population vaccinated with at least one dose by the 4th of July. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, more than half of all adults in the US are now fully vaccinated. Authorities in Vietnam have detected a new coronavirus variant that is a combination of the COVID-19 variants first detected in India and the UK. The government of Bangladesh has extended the ongoing COVID-19 lockdown in the country by one more week till June the 6th. The notification for the extension was issued by the Cabinet Division on Sunday. Saudi Arabia is lifting a ban on travelers arriving from 11 countries from Monday that it had imposed to curb the spread of coronavirus. The state news agency SPA has said, however, the travelers from these countries will be required to go through institutional quarantine. This list of the countries include the UAE, Germany, US, Ireland, Italy, Portugal, UK, Sweden, Switzerland, France and Japan.
This is All India Radio giving you the world news.
3 steps to stay protected and stay safe from COVID-19. Wear face mask, 2 gaz ki duri to maintain social distancing, maintain hand and face hygiene.
In today's hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on the TRIPS waiver proposal, which was recently co-sponsored by 62 countries, including India and South Africa, at the WTO. In conversation are Mr. Achal Prabhala, a writer, researcher and Shuttleworth Fellow who works extensively on the field of intellectual property and works towards ensuring equitable access to vaccines in the developing world with a focus on India, Brazil and South Africa, and Pavan Paramanandan, AIR correspondent.
Recently, India, South Africa and 60 other co-sponsors of the revised COVID-19 related TRIPS proposal forwarded it to the WTO. It is slated for discussion in a few days from now. Could you talk us through this development?
Pawan, so the proposal that has been solidified is as a result of having the US, through their trade representative, signal to the world and to the World Trade Organization that they were ready to start discussing the TRIPS waiver proposal. So that is the action that allowed South Africa and India to go forward with putting a concrete proposal on the table. It's not a revised proposal, I should just say. It is a proposal, and it's the original proposal that was floated. The reason I think that it comes across as revised is because the US trade representative clarified recently in meetings in the US with Senator Elizabeth Warren that the Biden administration support of the TRIPS waiver extends only to COVID vaccines. Yes? This, however, is not the proposal that South Africa and India made in October. And so the proposal that was floated last week by South Africa and India with nearly 60 other countries in support, formally in support, is to reiterate some of the key points that were made earlier, right? Which is that we need a TRIPS waiver for all technologies associated with the coronavirus pandemic. That includes vaccines, it includes treatments, but it crucially should include things like monopolies on plastic bags that you need for bioreactors in the vaccine production process. So the point of it is to say to limit it to just COVID vaccines will not solve the problem of COVID vaccines. Now, because why? And this is confusing. You know, in the production chain, there are many other monopolies that you need to circumvent sometimes, including for key equipment, essential parts of what you need to make a COVID vaccine. It's to clarify that the scope of the TRIPS waiver that we need is for everything associated with COVID, primarily vaccines and treatments, but also, any other aspect of testing or diagnostics or downstream equipment. The second part, which South Africa and India wanted to clarify clearly as well, was the duration of the proposal. There is a 3-year duration that has been proposed, and the reason it's been proposed is if you look at tabulation for when vaccinations might reach the rest of the world, if you combine that with the threat of variants requiring boosters or revaccinations or reformulations, the idea was that a 3-year window provides enough safety and lead time in order to both increase vaccine production but also manage it out into the future for all future requirements that might come up that are associated with the pandemic.
Now, Achal, what are the reasons for the pharmaceutical lobby to be opposing this proposal? To what extent does the argument that the pharmaceutical companies need these protections since they have invested in the research and development of these vaccines hold true?
There are stated reasons for why the pharmaceutical industry is opposing the TRIPS waiver, and then there are the real reasons. What the pharmaceutical industry says is that doing this will kill the incentive for innovation that they have to make the vaccines. Now, what they mean is that patent protection is a 20-year temporary monopoly that is granted by governments to pharmaceutical companies in exchange for the risk that they take by investing private capital to produce these vaccines. Now, unfortunately, in the pandemic, but also even before that, this is a canard. This is completely false. A bulk of the investment, if not the majority of it, has been from states. It has been primarily from taxpayers in the United States, in the UK, and in the EU. And what these taxpayers did is, through their governments, funnel money to cover things like 100% of the cost of developing the Moderna vaccine, or a very large percentage of developing the AstraZeneca vaccine and the J&J vaccine. Now, that means that pharmaceutical companies took very little risk in producing these vaccines. Their research could have failed and they would have not been out of pocket because it was compensated. It was what they call de-risked, meaning that the risk was removed. In addition to that, of course, they had pre-orders from, again, the very same states of very, very large doses for very large amounts of money that ensured that these companies could make adequate profits even in a pandemic, as a result of which Pfizer has now reported revenue this year from the vaccine alone of $25 billion. Now, the unsaid reasons why the pharmaceutical industry would not like the TRIPS waiver to pass is that they want to have control of their technology. They want to be the only people who produce it, and the reason they want to be in control of it is partly in order to guarantee the current revenue and profits that they can make from the vaccine, but also in the case of things like mRNA technology, which the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines use, they want to be able to control that technology in the future. The more companies that can produce an mRNA vaccine or just work with that platform to produce other cancer drugs and an AIDS vaccine that might come out of the same platform, the less control they have on those future profits. So there are very, very good financial reasons for the pharmaceutical industry to oppose this right now, and that's really why they're opposed to this.
Now, Achal, Brazil recently took the interesting and bold step of passing a legislation which would require pharma companies to disclose all COVID-19 vaccine-related information or risk losing the patent protection in the country. Could you throw some light on this move by Brazil?
This is again a really interesting situation, and it's quite closely connected to the TRIPS waiver proposal. The TRIPS waiver proposal is to provide the opportunity for countries to create a blanket law that simply suspends all pharmaceutical monopolies relating to COVID within the space of the pandemic, right? What Brazil is doing is to create legislation that is very similar to that. It will allow for case-by-case decisions, but quickly, where the executive branch, which is the government, can take decisions on suspending individual pharmaceutical monopolies under certain conditions, and also is asking them to share the knowledge that is required to make something like a vaccine. This bill was long in the making. It has now passed the upper house, which is called the Senado Federal in Brazil, and it's now in the lower house, which is the Câmara dos Deputados. It's not clear necessarily whether it will pass the lower house and become an act, and therefore become a law. However, there is strong support for it, and if it does, what it will be is a way by which Brazil is taking this into their own hands.
Now, one of the arguments against the TRIPS waiver is that the TRIPS agreement has enough flexibilities incorporated within it, such as the compulsory licensing provision, to deal with exigent circumstances. What are your views on this?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question, Pawan. Yes, we have lots of flexibilities in the law currently that allow us to do what we want. The problem with doing them one by one, a compulsory license is typically issued for one patent, right? Is that if you take a vaccine, it has a patent estate that, crosses over into the hundreds of patents sometimes. And it's very cumbersome and difficult legally even to identify merely the patents that comprise the estate, which is what they call it. The second part is that often the companies don't own all the patents on it. So we know, for instance, that Moderna has licensed patents, at least one that belongs to the University of Pennsylvania, that was in between sub-licensed to two different biotech companies. So the way that these patent estates are created is through mixing and matching. And so the company itself often cannot, give away its patents. Because it doesn't own them, right? So if you were to go by it one by one, you could spend years trying to untangle simply what the patent estate is on any given vaccine. What we need are more blanket provisions. And the blanket kinds of provisions, I think countries are simply nervous to use that because it hasn't been done before. And especially if you fear repercussions, that can be a very difficult thing to do. The other problem is that this question of technology transfer, because the TRIPS waiver, the best way to think about it is as though it's the first 30 meters in a 100-meter race. The next 30 meters is technology transfer, actually getting the technology, the manual to make this vaccine. And then the last 30 meters is sorting out different problems you might encounter with raw materials and equipment. The point about technology transfer, I think, is that in the Brazilian legislation that's being discussed in the lower house at the moment, there is a clause that forces companies to part with their technology, but it's not actually clear whether that can be legally enforced and how it can be legally enforced, right? So until we work out the appropriate legal levers that we can use to get this technology, we have to have another system to get it, right? Which is either to put pressure on companies to openly share this technology or to get the governments that funded them to put pressure on them to openly share it with us.
Jonas Salk, the inventor of the polio vaccine, when asked who owns his invention, replied famously that it is the people and there is no patent because it's like patenting the sun. What lessons does history hold for us to ensure that vaccines secure the greater good?
This is an excellent question, Pawan. Through history, we've had examples, and even in the present, of vaccines that are made with more equity. Vaccines that are made with the purpose of being delivered to everybody in the world, right? And the clearest example of that is the flu vaccine, because we all get another coronavirus vaccine, especially if you live in the US or the EU. It's less popular in India, but many people are now taking it, which is the seasonal flu vaccine. So once a year in the southern hemisphere, once a year in the northern hemisphere, you are advised to take a flu vaccine. And many, many billions of people do every single year. Now, this flu vaccine is created through a cooperative network of 140 laboratories and 110 countries, and through a network that analyzes flu strains that are circulating in all of these countries and centralizes the analysis of that data, which then results in the flu vaccine formula, which is a list of the strains that they recommend at the start of the flu season every year in the northern hemisphere and in the southern hemisphere, that is put out to the world, which means that anyone can then make that vaccine based on the recommended strains that are being put out. It's a collaborative effort between governments. It costs tens of millions of dollars, but it works and it provides this flu vaccine every year to billions of people, right? Without any intellectual property monopolies. And that's an excellent thing. There's nobody who cannot afford that vaccine. There's no government which cannot afford it. Now, in the 1950s, when Jonas Salk famously said, "Can you patent the sun?" about his invention of the polio vaccine, that was such a stirring emotional moment. There was something just so wonderful and large-hearted and public-spirited about it. It still makes me cry every time I hear it. That effort was funded, by families who used to send checks in to the laboratory that he worked at the University of Pittsburgh to help in this effort, because it was a genuinely public cooperative effort. And it came at a time in the United States when the United States itself was in the grip of a kind of public spiritedness. It had gone through the experience of both the Great Depression as well as the World War II. And both those experiences had solidified a kind of inter-American public spiritedness, but also a more global spirit of solidarity. where the United States helped Europe rebuild, for instance. So the interesting thing is that even prior to Jonas Salk, that entire era between the 1940s and the 1950s were marked by immense cooperative spirit. And one of the best examples of that is penicillin. So in the 1940s, as World War II, in the last 3 years or 4 years of World War II, penicillin was the COVID vaccine of that time. So penicillin was this magical antibiotic that was the very first time in history could cure such a wide range of infections as well. But the problem was that though it had been developed by Alexander Fleming in the UK, they hadn't figured out a way to mass produce it, and that's what they needed to do. The US first invested in that effort primarily to save American soldiers who were fighting in World War II. So what they did was they created this vast cooperative effort between government and different pharmaceutical companies and national laboratories. And they all shared information. So they all started making it. If any of them improved it, they had to share it with the others. And what they did was they created very, very quickly a network that produced billions of tablets of penicillin, which saved the lives, it's estimated, of nearly 1 million American soldiers in World War II. But then, of course, went on to have changed the world, literally, in terms of its benefit, both in the United States and outside. And this kind of cooperative effort actually gave rise to companies like Pfizer, which are now withholding their vaccine through their monopolies today. We are in a moment of emergency which requires a lot of normal rules to be suspended. I think that in time we should also consider why we have those normal rules, right? It's like the way I think about it is that, let's say you design roads that create roadblocks, especially for ambulances, right? And then you say, in a pandemic, let's remove those roadblocks because, of course, ambulances need to get to the hospital faster. It's, of course, the right thing to do. But you should also consider why, under normal circumstances, you want the roadblocks for those ambulances, right? Because they should get to the hospital faster even during, outside of a pandemic. So I do think that revisiting all of the rules that make access to these vaccines possible is incredibly urgent in the pandemic. It's also important for us to remember that once it ends, whenever it does.
Indeed, we fervently hope that while this pandemic has left a trail of destruction, it has a silver lining in the form of a reignited public spiritedness and sense of solidarity among humanity. Thank you for your time, Achal, and for your insight. So that was Mr. Achal Prabhala speaking exclusively to All India Radio.
In Afghanistan, 6 people were killed and several wounded when a mortar shell hit a house during a wedding ceremony in northern Kapisa province. The explosion took place Saturday evening in the Tagab district, which has seen fighting between the Afghan government forces and the Taliban insurgents. Shaikh Shoresh, a spokesman for the provincial police, blamed the Taliban for firing the mortar. A Taliban spokesman dismissed the allegation and said the mortar was fired by Afghan security forces. Violence has sharply increased across the country since Washington announced plans last month to pull out all US troops out of Afghanistan by 11 September. Indian Coast Guard is working tirelessly to extinguish the massive fire on board container vessel MV Express Pearl of Colombo, Sri Lanka. The challenging round-the-clock firefighting operation is underway since the 25th of this month, jointly with Sri Lankan authorities. The Defence Ministry said, at present, 3 ICG ships and 4 tugs deployed by Sri Lanka are involved in the operation and continuously fighting the fire.
In Canada, the remains of 215 children were found at the site of a former residential school for Indigenous children. The children were students at the Kamloops Indian Residential School in British Columbia that had closed in 1978. The remains were found with the help of a ground-penetrating radar specialist. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau wrote in a tweet that the news breaks his heart and it is a painful reminder of that dark and shameful chapter of Canada's history. Canada's residential school system, which forcibly separated Indigenous children from their families, constituted cultural genocide. A 6-year investigation into the now defunct system found in 2015. China's cargo spacecraft docked with the country's new space station carrying fuel and supplies for its future crew on Sunday. According to reports, the Tianzhou 2 or Heavenly vessel blasted off via a Long March 7 Y-3 rocket from the Wenchang spaceport on the southern Chinese island of Hainan on Saturday. The spacecraft is the second of 11 cargo missions needed to complete China's first self-developed space station, due to be completed in 2022.
In the Asian Boxing Championship at Dubai, Tokyo Olympics bound Pooja Rani won the gold medal in the 75 kg women's category, while legendary pugilist MC Maricom and Lalbuat Saihi finished with silvers. Pooja defeated Mauluda Movlonova of Uzbekistan 5-0 and secured India's first gold medal at the ongoing event. Earlier, six-time world champion Maricom crashed to a narrow split decision defeat 3-2 against two-time world champion Kazakhstan Nazim Kaizaibai in the final of 51 kg category. Meanwhile, tournament debutant Lalbuat Saihi in the 64 kg category also won the silver medal in her category, losing to Milana Safronova. Anupama plus 81 kg is yet to fight in her bout and would be hoping to win the gold medal. She will take on Kazakh boxer Lazat Kongibayeva. On Monday, Indian male boxers Amit Panghal 52 kg, Shiva Thapa 64 kg and Sanjeet 91 kg will fight it out in the finals. In football, Chelsea won the UEFA Champions League for the second time with a hard-fought victory over Manchester City in the All-Premier League confrontation in Porto. Kai Havertz got the winner 3 minutes before half-time when he collected a defense-splitting pass from Mason Mount to Round City goalkeeper Ederson and scored. A disciplined Chelsea sealed a second Champions League triumph, their first under manager Thomas Tuchel.
Now let us take a look at the major developments from around the world as reported in the foreign press. The New York Times carried the headline that a shooting outside a Florida banquet hall left 2 dead and 20 hurt in what officials say was a targeted shooting. The Guardian reports that Belgian talisman Kevin De Bruyne is an injury doubt for Euro 2020 after suffering facial fractures. The Globe and Mail writes that Israel and Egypt talked truce with Hamas and on rebuilding the Gaza Strip. The Sydney Morning Herald reports that New Zealand has thrown its support behind Australia's ongoing trade dispute with China, and Himalayan Times reports that Nepal faced a 6-2 defeat at the hands of Iraq in a friendly football match at the Al Feha Stadium in Basra. Bangladesh has announced the extension of the land border closure with India for 2 more weeks till the 14th of next month in view of the ongoing COVID situation. However, the movement of cargo between the two countries will remain unaffected. Bangladeshi stranded in India can return home through Benapole, Agartala, Hildi and Purimari ports after seeking permission. All other land ports will remain closed for the movement of the public. The decision was taken in a meeting chaired by Foreign Secretary Masood bin Momen on Saturday. The land borders between Bangladesh and India have remained closed since the 26th of April. The last closure of the border was ending on the 31st of May, which has now been extended for 2 more weeks. Earlier in the day, the government of Bangladesh also announced the extension of the countrywide lockdown till the 6th of June to control the spread of coronavirus in the country. Although the COVID-19 infection rate in Bangladesh has remained under control, a number of districts bordering India have shown a sharp increase in infection rates, causing concern in Bangladesh.
In US, 2 people were killed and at least 20 injured today when a gang of 3 shot indiscriminately into a crowd outside a concert in Miami, Florida. According to local police, the mass shooting happened during the early hours at Billiards Hall on a commercial estate near Miami Gardens. In a statement, police department said the venue was hosting a scheduled event and several patrons were standing outside. A quick look at the headlines once again. Prime Minister Narendra Modi lauds the role of Corona warriors in the fight against COVID-19. Government of India says nearly 12 crore doses of vaccine will be available in June this year for National COVID Vaccination Program. Thousands take to streets in Brazil protesting against President Bolsonaro's COVID management in the country. China's cargo spacecraft docks with Space Station module Tianhe. Chelsea crowned champions of Europe with a win over Manchester City at the UEFA Champions League final. And in boxing, India's Pooja Rani Batta wins gold at Asian Boxing Championship in Dubai. India is celebrating the 151st birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. Before we end, let us listen to his favorite bhajan, Vaishnav by artists from Croatia. And with that, we end this bulletin. We will be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.